It is my great honor to introduce our first speaker. Justin Engel is a professor of marketing at the University of Montana and the Poe Family Distinguished Fellow. Justin's academic research focuses on how people express their identities through consumption behaviors. Justin's research has recently been published in the Journal of Marketing, the Journal of Consumer Research, and the Journal of Consumer Psychology. His work has been covered by media outlets such as Sports Illustrated, ESPN, and the Washington Post, Harvard Business Review, and the Wall Street Journal. Isn't that amazing? Justin is also the creator and host of the College of Business podcast and Montana Public Radio program, A New Angle. In 2021, he released Fireline, a 6-part podcast about wildfire means to the West, our planet, and our way of life. In 2023, he co-authored the book, This is Wildfire, How to Protect Your Home, Your Community, and Yourself in the Age of Heat, with Nick Mott. When not teaching and doing research, he's chasing his 2 daughters around. Justin is a competitive endurance athlete and a product tester for Patagonia. Please welcome Justin to the stage.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you all tonight. Some of you might be wondering, like, why on earth is a marketing professor thinking about wildfire? Why on earth is a marketing professor here talking to you about stories of resilience, stories in general? Maybe you're asking that question to yourself. Maybe you're not. I certainly ask that question of myself frequently, and the story I'm going to sort of share tonight is perhaps I don't know that I have the best answer yet, but I'm moving closer to it. So tonight will be my best attempt well. I don't know if it'll be my best attempt thus far. It'll be an attempt, and we'll see how it goes. Anyway, Nate, we have one slide video to sort of tell you a little bit about Fireline. And this is kind of
wildfires.
This is kind of the midpoint of the story. We'll take it from there.
Raging wildfires have scorched a record number of acres and killed at least 31
continues to climb from those devastating wildfires.
Last year, wildfires scorched a landmass nearly 5 times the size of Yellowstone National Park. It was the largest area burned since reliable records began. Fires are getting bigger and hotter and more devastating than ever before. But what all that fire means and what to do about it depends on who you ask.
The experience of a forest taking fire is really something.
Not only a gift to us, but it's more of a gift to the land.
There will always be fear of fire. I know that, and I don't pretend there won't be. But in certain situations, there shouldn't be.
I'm Justin Engel, and for the last couple years, I've been talking to scientists, historians, and firefighters themselves to hear their stories.
You owe it to the guys that died.
I wanted to figure out, how did we get here?
We're going to knock fire out of the landscape.
Remember, only you can prevent forest fires.
It was a crazy ambition.
And where do we go?
It just, knowledge is freaking power.
I'll talk about it in a calm way, but this is me hitting the panic button.
Am I making any difference here with the science? That's what I wonder sometimes.
This is Fireline, a 6-part podcast series from Montana Public Radio and the University of Montana College of Business about what wildfire means for the West, our planet, and our way of life. Coming March 9th. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Anyway, so as I said, that was kind of the midpoint of the story. So I started as a professor at the University of Montana College of Business in 2012. And my background, my graduate studies are largely in social psychology. I was interested in how people make decisions and how they form attitudes and shape their identity, sometimes in ways outside of their own awareness. And how does that lead to marketing? Well, there's sort of a pragmatic approach to that. I had a business background as an undergrad. I studied business and then worked in business for a number of years until I developed this interest in social psychology. And then as a graduate student, realized that getting a job as a marketing professor, I could still study social psych, but also find a job, and that job was likely to pay a little bit more than a psych professor job. It just seemed like it made some pragmatic sense. So pursued that, got the job here. And over the course of the 12 years I've been doing that, I've grown more and more nauseated with marketing. It started, my study of it started as an interesting way to think about how people make decisions and how they carry themselves in the world. And my teaching started to devolve into helping students get jobs in fields where they'd be, optimizing the customer experience, optimizing a search engine, helping people run campaigns using the data available on Facebook. And I grew really uncomfortable with that. And as a result, I've sort of moved my teaching further and further away from that, to the point now where I teach an introductory course at our college that is just designed to teach students how to go to college, really, and take advantage of the opportunity in front of them. At the same time, as I was growing disillusioned in my academic discipline, I started getting interested in people's stories and learning that in this community there are some amazing stories. There's such a rich diversity of story in this community. And that led me to launch an interview program that's now on Montana Public Radio, as Ren mentioned, A New Angle. And that just gave me the opportunity to hear story after story after story and learn so much about people, how they've approached life and how they've moved through their own experiences, how they've found ways to be resilient. I mean, think of how much has changed not only in our world, but here in Western Montana in the last 10 years. It's been pretty remarkable, and to learn and sort of track how people have adapted to that in the 6 years that I've been doing this program has been pretty wonderful. Within that, climate and how we sort of deal with the climate crisis has always been top of mind, and I certainly feel a fair amount of guilt participating in the world of consumerism in the role I have as a business educator. And I had been trying to think of ways to wade in to doing some good toward helping us address the climate crisis, and realizing that there is some ability that I've developed to be able to translate some of the amazing work happening around us. Here in Missoula, we're at an epicenter for wildfire. There's world-class fire science happening. There's world-class social science in the fire space happening. There are tip-of-the-spear firefighters, policymakers. So much of the highest level work in the fire space is happening right here. But it seemed to me that not a lot of people understood how it all tied together, and how these great people sort of were forming a set of strategies that can actually help us address this wildfire crisis. I mean, this is one of the pieces of climate change that we actually have some agency to improve. And we can make a real difference in how our society chooses to adapt to a world with more fire. And so that general curiosity led me down this path of developing this podcast. And this podcast is a hugely different project than my interview show. And I think ignorance in this type of storytelling and what it takes is the only reason I got into it, because I had no idea how big a project, a narrative podcast with interviews and original score and scenes and characters and all these dimensions that I sort of took for granted, how big a lift it was. And as I started to get into it, I quickly realized that I don't have the tools as a business professor, as a social scientist. Like, that's not the sort of storytelling that I have any training in. Like, this is a real journalistic enterprise. So teamed up with Nick Mott, who's a phenomenal journalist here in Montana, lives in Livingston now. If you've listened to any of the real premier podcasts produced in Montana, chances are Nick's fingerprints are all over them. And he's become a wonderful friend. We also had a young man by the name of Victor Iveas. He was a student in the journalism program at UM at the time. and it was during COVID. So the three of us just sort of developed this Zoom routine of like, okay, we got to build this thing, and how do you build it? And Nick was the one that sort of taught us, like, you do it with characters, you do it with narrative, you do it with scenes. And these were all new skills. So Fireline, and I don't know if any of you have listened to it, but if you do have occasion to listen to it, you'll find that our aim there is to tell stories within stories within stories. So there's 6 parts. It forms a narrative arc from, the moment we're in now, how we got here, how what we're doing is not working, to news you can use, right? And then within that, we had to use characters to sort of tell that, each one of those stories, and to get folks to listen. And in a podcast form, characters are really important. Scenes are really important. And you can't be as descriptive. I mean, oftentimes when you're reading about climate, talking to a scientist, you get a lot of facts, right? You get acres burned, homes lost, degrees that the climate has changed, all of this descriptive stuff and science, information, the information model, right? But the information model is not that persuasive, right? We're learning that more information about what's happening with the climate is not changing our ways. And so I think stories, or stories in general, but stories of human impact and how people are not only committing their lives to making this world better, but also experiencing the changes that the world is putting upon many of, well, it's circular, right? Like, that's a story within the story of the podcast. Like, there's, a thread in anthropology. We talked to an anthropologist who developed this theory around the moment we as humans were able to start controlling fire was the moment we became human. It sort of set in motion the ability to cook food, which set in motion the ability to ingest more calories and power a larger brain, and our brains grew. And so the very idea that controlling fire is what made us human, you fast forward 2 million years, and now our obsession with fire has put our planet in peril, right? So like narrative kind of hooks like that are the sorts of stories that are within the wildfire story. The podcast did really well. It was well received. I think it sort of hit a moment in the popular. There was a need for it. There was a need for that sort of understanding, and that led to this wonderful opportunity to write a book. And I'd never written a book before. Nick had never written a book before, and we both sort of felt like there's no way we can do this. But if we are together in it, maybe we can pull it off. A publisher from Bloomsbury had listened to the podcast and reached out and said, had you guys ever thought of doing a book? And with so many amazing writers in this community, and many of them struggling to get their work published, I feel sort of sheepishly guilty about how this book opportunity happened in reverse. My understanding is it's typically not that easy, so I'm grateful for that. But anyway, writing a book about wildfire is a whole different enterprise, right? Different medium and a different set of tools, a different style of writing. You can use information in different ways. Characters play less of a role in a book like this. Scenes play less of a role. You can use a little bit more information, but it was a different set of skills that really opened me up to new opportunities. Basically, the idea being is that there are things we can do with wildfire to make the situation better. We can manage our lands differently. We can build our homes in different places and build them smarter with different materials. We can do this at a community level. We can change our zoning regulations. We can change how we build and where we build. And these are all things that some take more money than others. Some are harder to enact from a policy standpoint than others. But at the very least, like, all of us can play a role. We can all take actions, whether it's cleaning our gutters, which makes our homes much more safe to being burned, to advocating for change at a national level. So anyway, I'm coming up against time, but as I close, I just kind of want to read you a little passage from the book that I think sums up sort of our approach to this work. One day this summer, A lightning bolt will strike an old ponderosa pine, or a gust of wind will send a power line to the ground, or a car will light up some vegetation on an overgrown double-track road. A train will send off a spark. The burning entrails of a firework will rain down on a juniper. Someone will take a lighter to a blade of grass. There's no way to eliminate fire, but we can mitigate its severity and how it affects us. Doing that requires thinking long term. It requires changing ourselves and our homes and engaging with the world around us and our neighbors in ways we may not have considered before. Fire season is at least 80 days longer than it was 30 years ago. By the end of the century, experts anticipate extreme fire events to rise by 50% across the world. That means flames will burn bigger in bigger areas during more parts of the year, from temperate grasslands to tropical savanna to tundra in Australia, Greece, the Amazon, Indonesia, the Arctic, and beyond. We've mobilized an army to fight a never-ending war on fire, yet we build deeper into areas ready to go up in flames. And we keep ramping up our burning of fossil fuels, contributing to the warming of our planet and making conditions ripe for bigger, more extreme blazes. We're at a precarious moment for wildfire in the United States. We can keep thinking about these conflagrations in the same way, or we can change course. The question driving this book is, how can we recognize both truths of wildfire? It threatens and destroys so much of what we love, our homes, livelihoods, mental state, our very ability to breathe. But it's also a process that's completely natural. It rejuvenates forests and ecosystems. Fire has burned across the earth longer than our species has walked the planet. How do we live in a world with fire? How do we manage it? And how do we manage ourselves? Anyway, generally this is a story that we try to make hopeful and empowering. And I think in a world where climate seems to bring us doom and gloom on a regular basis, wildfire is an area where we can actually make some difference. And to me, that's an area where investing some energy, the energy and few abilities that I have seem like they can move the needle. So, yeah, thanks for being here tonight.